Marshall McLuhan once said that you shouldn't let college interrupt your education. And I think USAO has kind of taken that to heart by offering events like this beyond the classroom. So students in particular, but also members of the community, can learn not just politics, but the arts, history, and other things that you might not learn in class. I'm not used to having 20 minutes to talk at these political events, so I thought I'd recite some Robert Service. No, I'm just kidding. I could. There are strange things done 'neath the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge, I cremated Sam McGee. I will take requests when we're done if anybody would like any more of that nonsense. It is great to be here and have an opportunity to talk about my life and why I was interested in making this race for governor this year. It wasn't something that was on my radar screen when I left the Attorney General's office in January of 2011. I didn't think I would ever be a candidate for anything again, and Linda and I were enjoying traveling more. Our grandkids are in Virginia, so we have to travel to see them and enjoy doing that a great deal. But the problem is I can read, and Linda can read, and we'd get up in the morning and read the paper about what was going on in the state, and periodically when we'd read something about education being cut or what was happening in health or mental health or what was happening to our prison system bursting at the seams, you know, at the breakfast table I would say, well, do you want me to run? And Linda would say, no, I just want you to hear this story that was in the paper this morning. And so we'd go on to the next day and there'd be another story. And finally, the answer was yes, well, I guess you better. Because there wasn't anybody, to my way of thinking, that had the capacity to win a statewide election, that had name ID or either was able to self-fund or the ability to raise money. There wasn't anybody running who was talking about the things that needed to be done in the state of Oklahoma. And I finally decided that it would not be fair to me for all of the things that the state has done for me not to try to do the things that needed to be done to fix the problems that we have. So last May the 1st, I announced for governor and have been traveling the state, all four corners and places in between. This is not my first trip to Grady County, not my first trip to Chickasha, nor will it be my last in this election year as we talk to people and visit about the issues and try to make a difference in what's happening in Oklahoma. The resume, I should have just sat down after the resume was read. There it is, that's what I've done. But I want to give you a little background how I could go into the Attorney General's office, actually not the Attorney General's office, the District Attorney's office in 1982 and run for DA the same year and get elected without opposition. And there is a backstory to that. My first week on the job as chief prosecutor in the DA's office, Mike Turpin was out running for AG at that time. So I was pretty much running the shop. And this was the first week in May 1982, a fellow by the name of William Thomas Cartwright broke into a home on the north side of town, the home of a family that he used to work for at Riddle Remodeling. It was Hugh Riddle and his wife Charma. He shot Hugh Riddle with a shotgun and killed him, and then shot Charma, shot her in the leg, which later had to be amputated, and stabbed her in the abdomen. When she went to the emergency room, she was literally at death's door. But she survived and testified. The perpetrator went on the lam and was gone for 3 days. The third night, I was over at a police lieutenant's house by the name of Jay Clinton, and I was shooting pool over at Jay's. This is a lesson to everybody in here, but particularly the men. If you're going to be gone at midnight, you best be where you told your wife you're going to be. Because she got a call, Linda got a call from Dovey Field, who said, I'm Tommy Cartwright's sister, and if the DA will come to my house alone and unarmed, I will tell him where my brother is. So I go driving over to Dovey Field's house. Jay Clinton, the police lieutenant, was following me in his car, but per instructions, I was alone. I had a service revolver that I left in the car when I went up to the door. Knocked on the door, she let me in, and Cartwright was sitting there on the couch. So, you know, a true politician, I walked up, stuck out my hand and said, I'm Drew Edmondson. And he said, I'm Tommy Cartwright. And I said, you're going to have to come with me. So I put him in my car, drove him down to the police station, walked upstairs with him, and it's like, anybody remember Hawaii 5-0? It's just like Dan-O, you know, book him Dan-O. I said, book him, murder one. Which they did. I went out in the hall all by myself and said, yes. Okay, so you want to get elected DA, arrest a murderer by yourself, bring him in, book him, and then have the preliminary hearing. Nobody filed against me. And it just kind of held over for the next 2 terms. I believe in involvement in whatever I'm doing. I did that as district attorney. I enjoyed going on if I was going to draft a search warrant, I wanted to go on the search. I went to the scene of every homicide for 10 years in Muskogee County because I didn't know whether I would have to be describing that scene some months later to a jury, and I wanted to be there and knew what it looked like personally. And that's the attitude I took to the Attorney General's office, kind of hands-on, trying to innovate, trying to take the resources of the Attorney General's office and do something good and constructive. That's why when we finished the litigation against the tobacco industry, I thought it was important to take the next step and make sure that the money that was going to be coming into the state of Oklahoma be spent on what the lawsuit was all about, and that was the health of our citizens. So I teamed up with Robert Butkin, who at that time was the state treasurer, and we drafted and got the legislature to submit the constitutional amendment that would put the proceeds or the bulk of the proceeds from that settlement into a constitutional trust that was protected from the legislature. And in the Constitution, it said it had to be spent on the health of our citizens. And that went on the ballot in the year 2000, 2 years after the settlement itself. The voters of the state of Oklahoma overwhelmingly approved it, almost a 2-to-1 margin, well over 60%, and that is the law today. I mentioned that, and it was mentioned that the corpus of that trust now has over $1 billion in it. They're spending tens of millions of dollars on cancer research, adult stem cell research. They have a program now where they'll pick up the medical school bills of a doctor if he will agree to practice in a rural area of Oklahoma that's helping to provide health care in the less densely populated parts of the state. It's doing great things through the trust. And I mention all that because I read in this morning's paper that there is a measure working its way through the legislature to submit for a vote of the people a constitutional amendment that will give 75% of that money to the legislature to deal with and take it away from the trust. And it will no longer be protected constitutionally. And I urge you, if that gets on the ballot, to read about it, to be up on it, and to be ready to fight it, and to tell the people in your neighborhood, your church, the people that you deal with, that this is not a good idea. There was a reason we put this money out of the reach of the legislature, and to please continue protecting that money so it will be spent on the health of the citizens of Oklahoma. If it gets on the ballot this November, I'm going to be spending part of every speech I make until Election Day talking about that issue. It's very important. Also had the opportunity in a settlement with Southwestern Bell where the Corporation Commission was telling, it's now AT&T, was telling Bell that they had to demonstrate their commitment to Oklahoma if they wanted to opt into a different form of regulation. And Bell said, what are we supposed to do? And they said, work that out with the Attorney General. At that time, I had read a comprehensive study about the ability across the 50 states of graduates to compete in the global marketplace. And they said Oklahoma ranked 47th among the 50 states. And one of the reasons we ranked 47th was because we ranked 50th in access to computers in our schools, not our colleges, but in all the way from K through 12. In our public schools, there was a dearth of computers, computer training, and teachers and administrators that recognized the importance of that. So I said to Southwestern Bell, how about creating a fund with us in a trust to provide computers and training to our schools across the state of Oklahoma? And they agreed, and we settled on a figure of $30 million, and we established the Oklahoma Education Technology Trust, and it was signed off on by the Corporation Commission, and it's what we have today. We had the original $30 million. Since that time, we have put over $20 million worth of computers, equipment, and training in schools all across the state of Oklahoma. And not only have the original $30 million still in the trust with interest earnings, it's now $38 million. The trust is still growing and providing that kind of equipment and training. And we know in this arena that what is just wonderful today is going to be obsolete in 5 years. So it's going to be a never-ending process, and that trust will not expire. It will continue meeting the needs of our students all across Oklahoma as long as those needs exist. That's the kind of outside-the-box thinking that I enjoyed doing as Attorney General. We did a number of things. We did the Don't Call list where you could register your phone number and people, except politicians, could go ahead and bother you anytime because they're exempt. Not under the law, they're exempt by Supreme Court ruling. You can't interfere with political speech. But other than that, the number of disturbing calls that you get almost always right when you're sitting down to dinner should be cut down dramatically if you have registered your phone number on that list. Those kinds of things are what I want to do as governor. Seeing the needs of the state and finding out how to meet those needs. Number one is education. I'm going to limit what I'm going to say about education, about funding, and about the other needs of state government because I know those questions are coming, and I'll be able to deal with them a little more extensively when I get asked the question. But job one is going to be fixing the budget. And once the budget is fixed, then we start on the important priorities of state government, number one of which is education. And we know that for a fact. We know where we rank among the 50 states in teacher pay and per capita expenditures on education. And we also know, and I think we know specifically in this room, that Oklahoma has cut appropriations to higher ed more than any other state in the nation. Alabama is a distant second in how much state has cut appropriations to higher education. State appropriated dollars used to be 70% of the budget of our colleges and universities. Today, I used to say it was 30%. I've been corrected and said it's now 18% of the budget of our colleges and universities come from appropriated dollars. And guess where they make up the difference? They raise tuition. They have to. And so year after year after year, most of our colleges and universities have raised tuition to the students. Ultimately, that will price some kids out of college, which is the exact wrong thing to do. You know, if we want to compete, if we want our kids to be able to have the best shot at jobs and careers, if we want this state to grow to where we're attracting new industry to come in, we have got to have a first-rate educational system from pre-K all the way through university training. Otherwise, it's going to be a dismal decade to come if we don't reverse track and start funding education funding higher education. And funding education is not just a teacher pay raise. Teachers need a pay raise. And $5,000 is a good place to start, but it's not going to finish the job. The average increase in salary of a teacher today that either leaves the state or leaves the profession is $19,000. That's how short we are on paying teachers what they're worth and what they can earn in some other capacity. And if we want the best and the brightest teaching our kids and our neighbors' kids and our future employees, if we want the best and the brightest up there at the head of the class teaching their courses, then we're going to have to pay them what they're worth. And that means getting a budget that will meet those needs. That's job one, and we can't just finish with a teacher pay raise. Our schools, our public schools, haven't had an increase in their ADA allowance for 8 years or longer, which means our schools are operating on the same or less budget than they had a decade ago. So if all we do is earmark a fund for teacher salaries and don't increase the base budget of our schools, then they're going to continue to slide and not be able to even hire the teachers that they need. Now that's why we've got 35, 40 kids in a classroom, is we have a teacher shortage. And we have a teacher shortage because we aren't paying them and they're leaving the state of Oklahoma in droves. We have got to correct that. We have got to fix that situation. Everybody running for governor, possible exception of the Libertarians, I'm never quite sure where they are, but everybody who's running as a Democrat or Republican has been saying the same thing, that the real solution is economic development. You know, we've got to help existing businesses to expand, and we've got to entice other companies to move into the state of Oklahoma to bring their corporate families here and start improving the economy of this state. True. Where we differ is on how we're going to get there. Because I don't believe we can convince a corporate CEO of any stature to bring a major company to Oklahoma if we're not investing in our own people. And I've talked to economic development experts in Tulsa, Oklahoma City, and smaller communities across the state, and I get the same answer. They have talked to CEOs who have said, why should we invest in Oklahoma when you're not? And the answer to that question is we must. If we want to bring them in, we have got to start investing in our own people, in our education, in our health, in our mental health, in criminal justice, in bringing down our prison population. If we don't make those investments, then we're not going to convince major corporations, good corporations, high-paying jobs corporations to come into the state of Oklahoma. The good news in the panoply of ills that are facing this state is that they're almost all man-made. I say almost all because Linda corrected me the other night. She said some of them are woman-made. And that's true. The point is they are deliberate decisions that have been made by the people in power that have resulted in the dismal figures that we have on education, health, mental health, and even roads, where the legislature has taken $500 million a year for 2 years in a row out of the Department of Transportation to plug holes in the budget, and our 8-year rolling bridge and highway plan is now a 10-year plan. And they've also taken gasoline money that's been set aside for county government. If you have a complaint about your county roads and bridges, talk to your county commissioner, but the real blame belongs up the turnpike in Oklahoma City because they've been taking your county commissioner's money away in order to plug holes in the budget and still refuse to acknowledge that what we have in Oklahoma is a revenue problem. Now, there may be waste and inefficiency in state government. There's waste and inefficiency in anything that's big. But we aren't going to solve this problem by cutting out waste and inefficiency. We need to do that because it's the right thing to do. We can only solve this problem by increasing the revenue base of the state of Oklahoma. And that's got to be job one. Well, as I did mention earlier, we've got to improve our revenue base. We've got to fix our budget problems. I have several things specifically and several things generally that I'm interested in doing. Number one, just as rapidly as I possibly can as governor of the state of Oklahoma, we are going to opt into the Medicaid expansion. If that alternative is still on the books, and it is today, if the Congress doesn't take that away, that's what we're going to do. That is millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into the state of Oklahoma. It's our tax dollars that currently and have for the last 8 years been going to other states instead of coming into the state of Oklahoma. It has deprived almost 200,000 Oklahomans who would have been eligible for that Medicaid expansion coverage. It has deprived them of health insurance through Medicaid. And it has caused great damage to our hospitals and our nursing homes and our physicians as the state continues to lower reimbursement rates for those institutions. And it is so sad, and this is particularly true in rural Oklahoma, that hospitals have either declared bankruptcy or are on the verge of it and don't know at the beginning of the month if they're going to be able to make payroll at the end of the month. The same with nursing homes, because Medicaid does reimbursement to nursing homes, and as the reimbursement rate is lowered, some of those nursing homes have and will go out of business. Not such a big deal in Oklahoma City or Tulsa because they got a bunch of hospitals and a bunch of nursing homes. But if you're in a town that only has one hospital or one nursing home, if it shuts down, then you've got a serious problem on how to take care of your loved one in the event of a heart attack, or if your aunt or grandmother's in a nursing home and all of a sudden you have to drive 75 miles to visit instead of being able to visit them in town. Okay, number one, opt into Medicaid expansion. Number two, restore the gross production tax to 7% on all wells, regardless of whether they drill vertically or horizontally, whether they use hydraulic fracturing or not. We have an asset underneath the soil of the state of Oklahoma, oil and gas. It belongs to the state as an asset. Now, the landowner is entitled to royalties, entitled to damages, and that's all well and good. But the asset that is depletable is an asset of the state, and the state is entitled to reimbursement for it. And here again, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars annually that we've been deprived. It may have been a good idea at the outset when horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing were experimental and the state wanted to encourage that practice and lowered the gross production tax for that form of drilling to try to encourage oil and gas companies to engage in it. Well, it worked. Experiment over. They're now making billions of dollars and we're subsidizing them with a lower tax rate. We don't need to do that, and the budget can't stand it. So let's restore it to the 7% where it was and get our fiscal house back in order. The third specific thing that I want to talk about is the capital gains tax deduction. Capital gains tax deduction. The commission that we've got reviewing these tax incentives took a look at this one. It was supposed to spur economic growth and increase the revenues to the state of Oklahoma. And the commission looked at it, they hired experts. The experts said, well, it did. It brought in, over a 5-year period, $9 million in additional revenue to the state. It cost us $465 million through the deduction. And the expert said, this is one that needs to go. The commission voted to keep it. Well, I'm in favor of keeping the experts and getting rid of the commission. If they're going to make decisions like that, that is not, to me, a good net return. $9 million back with a $465 million investment. Over a 5-year period, we're talking $80 to $90 million a year that we need in the state of Oklahoma. It's not working the way we intended. Nice try, good experiment. Worth a try, but we can't do that anymore, and we need that money for the state. And the other specific that I will mention is the increase of $1.50 on the price of a pack of cigarettes. And I would support that even if we did not have a budget problem as a public health issue, because the price of a pack of cigarettes is the number one thing that impacts on youth smoking. So if you want your kids and grandkids not to start smoking cigarettes, jack the price up, and that'll be the first thing they look at when they think about buying a pack of cigarettes. And our cigarettes are artificially low in the state of Oklahoma because our taxes on that product are lower than most states. And that is going to be, one estimate was $260 million a year off that. And we hope that that is a figure that will decline in future years as people quit smoking. That's the whole idea of the thing. So we may not enjoy that $200+ million for very many years, but the budget needs it right now. There are a lot of other tax incentives, tax loopholes, and tax credits, and we need to look at every one of them to see if they're fulfilling their mission or if they're there for some other reason. You know, we have tax breaks for historic districts and historic buildings. I don't have a problem with that because it has another reason. It wasn't adopted for economic development, it was adopted to preserve. The same with the sales tax exemption for Girl Scout cookies and things like that. I'm okay with that because it had some other purpose. But the ones that were adopted that were intended to create economic development, we test those. If they're working, keep them. If they're not working, it's time to get rid of them. We can't afford to subsidize unless we're getting a return off of it. The problem is, every one of those tax breaks has a lobbyist full-time in Oklahoma City trying to keep those things on the books. And there's nobody lobbying on the other side. That's the job of the governor, and that's what I want to do. So those are the specific and general areas on restoring the budget. Well, thank you for the question, because to me, you know, after the budget is restored, and that has to be job one, education is right there at the top. We've got to fix those problems. And I'm reminded, and some of you probably remember this, back in 1990 or 1991, when Henry Bellman, Republican governor, and a Democratic legislature got together and passed House Bill 1017, the education reform measure. And it had a tax increase as part of it. And the tax increase that was adopted in 1017 funded a great raise for teachers, but it also funded a lot of reforms within our educational system. It reduced class size. It provided for not only a teacher pay raise, but for a senior teacher and a teacher's aide or teacher's assistant to be in every classroom. It funded counselors in our schools. It did so many things that today are all gone. They're all lost. So what we need to be doing in education every day in every way is trying to restore the reforms that were adopted in 1017. Every bit of it that we can, and the impediment to that is, and because of 1017, the very next year, the legislature put on the ballot, it may have been an initiative petition, State Question 640, which created the 75% hurdle for any new revenue measures, was a direct result of what they did in 1017, which essentially is no new taxes. Because you can't get 75%. You can't get 75% of the legislature to agree on the day of the week. You know, they'll have a vote on whether or not it's Wednesday. And trying to get 75% to agree that it's Wednesday is probably difficult. We had over 70 votes for, in the first special session, to have a tax package passed. Over 70 votes, and it failed. Now, folks, that's not democracy. That is not democracy. Well, that allows a minority, and a small minority, to control the fiscal policy of the state. But I digress. We were talking about education. Okay, in a nutshell, I want to restore the reforms that were adopted in 1017, and it's not going to be done overnight. It's going to be done incrementally. It's going to require not only teacher pay raises, but a fairly substantial increase in the base funding of our schools. They can't hire the teachers to lower the class size. So they've got one teacher with 35 or 40 kids in the class instead of two teachers with 20 each. And one of the saddest things I heard, I've been decrying the fact that 1/5 of our school districts have gone to 4-day weeks, and I thought that the sole purpose of that was to try to save a little money. And I talked to a superintendent in a rural county who said, well, that was the first purpose of it, but we also did that to try to keep our teachers. And I said, how's that? He said, well, if we only have class 4 days a week, they can on that 5th day take a part-time job at Walmart. They can supplement their salary if they have an extra day to work outside the classroom. What a sad commentary on the state of Oklahoma if we have to go to 4-day weeks for our kids so our teachers can take a part-time job because we aren't paying them enough. I can't think of a sadder signal to the rest of the country that Oklahoma is not open for business. Oklahoma is suffering, and we've got to turn this ship around if we want to grow in the future the way we'd really like to. Well, the state has a Department of Commerce that is supposed to be very active in economic development, and it works in tandem with the economic development efforts that are present in most chambers. And I expect that's true here in Chickasha, that you have a chamber that's involved. Do you have an industrial park here in Chickasha? Well, the State Department of Commerce is supposed to be a partner in those economic development efforts. And I'm most familiar, because I've been in visiting with them, with the effort being done in Oklahoma City and Tulsa in economic development, and they do such a good job. I don't think they need the state's help as much as the other 75 counties do. And that's kind of where I want the State Department of Commerce to focus its attention. On economic development, on site selection for companies that might be looking at the state of Oklahoma, for making the sales pitch on why they should consider the state of Oklahoma. And there again, I don't think we need to move from 49th to 2nd overnight in teacher salaries or per capita expenditures for education in order to make a case to a company. But I do think we need to be moving up instead of down. I think we need to be moving the needle up on all of those factors, except things like we are number 1 in incarceration of women. That number needs to come down. We're number 1 in teen pregnancies. That needs to come down. But the indicators dealing with education and health and mental health, those needles need to be moving up. And that will allow us to make the case for economic development. And we can't forget, whether it's through the Department of Commerce or the Department of Agriculture, that we need to work on markets for our products as well. Not just the jobs themselves and not just recruiting industries to come in, but helping the businesses and the farm activities that are here market their wares not only across the country but across the world. Well, there are a number. And the one that comes to mind first and foremost, the Department of Mental Health in 2010 came up with a Smart on Crime proposal, which basically said we need a series of drug, alcohol, and mental health treatment facilities around the state of Oklahoma, available to families who have a loved one who is suffering from an addiction or a mental health problem. And they need to be able to get treatment in those facilities whether or not they have health insurance and whether or not they have means, but also available as a tool for DAs and judges when a case does come before them, before somebody is sentenced to the penitentiary, to work with that person, that person's family, that person's defense counsel, saying, we understand there's an underlying problem here. Would you like an opportunity to fix that before we ask the judge to pass a sentence on you? That needs to be done. And folks, it's not rocket science. It costs $3,000 to $5,000 to treat a drug, alcohol, or mental health problem. It costs $20,000 to $30,000 a year to lock them up. So it's not only the right thing to do from a moral standpoint, and from a recidivism standpoint, but it's also the fiscally conservative thing to do. It will save us money in the long run. If we do that, I am convinced that prison population will start to drop. And it needs to drop. We're at 110% of capacity. Joe Albaugh, who's now director of the Department of Corrections, is asking, I think his request was $1 billion to build new prisons here in the state of Oklahoma. And also, I wasn't asked this, but I think we ought to wean ourselves from private prisons. I think it's wrong to make a profit off the incarceration of people. The state of Oklahoma, if it's going to send somebody to the penitentiary, has an obligation to make sure that they are incarcerated safely, that other inmates are safe from them, that their medical problems are treated, that they have an opportunity to work, to learn a vocation if necessary, to go through rehabilitation, to have available drug, alcohol, and mental health counseling. All of those are obligations of the state if we're going to lock somebody up. Otherwise, they come out at the end of their sentence worse than when they went in. And particularly if they are a young offender, they're going to come out a seasoned criminal unless we do a better job in corrections than we're doing right now. And we can do that. One more point on that. We have reduced appropriated dollars to law enforcement, particularly DAs, to where now they're relying on other avenues of income that almost demand that they prosecute people. If they're going to get the fees and the other costs, they can't do that, sending them to a drug and alcohol treatment facility. They've got to prosecute. And I really believe we can solve some of that problem if we take away those avenues of funding and replace them with appropriated dollars. Help the DAs out and also wean them from those programs that sometimes result in hardship to people that's not necessary. That's a very good question, and it's fundamentally outlined in the Constitution of the United States and in the concept of federalism, where the supreme law of the land is the Constitution of the United States, and the Constitution says next are the statutes adopted by the federal government and the treaties that are entered into by the federal government. They have supremacy over the Oklahoma Constitution and Oklahoma statutes. That is our framework of government, which is over 200 years now. People sometimes forget the treaty part of that because the sovereignty enjoyed by the Indian nations in Oklahoma is part of the supremacy of the Constitution and the treaties of the federal government. And that's why we have separate Indian tribes with some degree of autonomy and sovereignty over their land. The state of Oklahoma has the same kind of framework where our Constitution within the state of Oklahoma has supremacy over statutes and supremacy over municipal ordinances and things of that nature. In all of that framework, from the federal to the state and from the state to the local, I think the most important thing to avoid are unfunded mandates, where either the federal government is telling the state or the state is telling a county or a municipality, you must do this, but we're not going to provide you any money with which to do it. And that is extremely difficult. It And it's happening today more and more as the state takes money that were intended for counties, for example, but the county still has the obligation to take care of the roads and bridges within the county, but the state has now taken the money that was intended to do that. I would certainly want to work more cooperatively with the federal government than we've seen over the last 8 years. That doesn't mean that they're going to tell us what to do in the state of Oklahoma in an unfunded mandate way, but there are occasions when we need the assistance of the federal government, and we've seen enough tornadoes in this state and the work of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, to know that those occasions arise. We hate it, but they do, and you need to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody in Washington, D.C. to get the immediate help that we need in those situations. One area that is really proving to be a conundrum are the federal laws on narcotics, marijuana, and others that are now running just head on into the 29 states, now more than half the states, that have adopted either recreational or medical use of marijuana, which is in violation of federal law. So this is a real area, and Oklahoma is going to be voting on that in June, on the medical marijuana. And it's in the last in the years under President Obama, the position of the Justice Department and the administration was they were not going to interfere if a state has legalized something through legislation. They were not going to interfere in that, and the current Attorney General has changed that policy. I haven't seen it play out yet in any state, but the specter is there that somebody will be doing something perfectly legal under the laws of Colorado or Oregon or Washington or 26 other states, and all of a sudden, federal agents are going to sweep into a dispensary or some other facility that's licensed under state law, but is in violation of federal laws that have been on the books since the 30s. Well, our teachers have done everything they could to bring attention to the plight that they're facing in education. We have a law on the books that prohibits teachers from striking, but I've looked at that statute and it applies to teachers that are in negotiations with a school district, and they are forbidden to go on strike as a negotiating tactic with a school district. There's no prohibition against taking a leave and coming to Oklahoma City and trying to make a case to the Oklahoma legislature. That's not against the law. And my position is, if the teachers decide in the state of Oklahoma that they want to come to Oklahoma City and make that case, I'm going to stand with them. I don't think people have a right to defy the federal government unless they're willing to bear the consequences. But I also don't think in this arena that any municipality or any state is obligated to assist the federal government in enforcing policies that that state or that municipality may not agree with. And specifically, we're talking about the immigration, undocumented aliens who are in this country, and dreamers, the children who were brought into this country at a very young age and now may be adults. Right now, the pause that was put in place on taking any official action has elapsed, and the federal government has said we're going to proceed to deport these people, and a court has enjoined them from taking any action. The question is, if a city like San Francisco or Boston or Washington, D.C. or anywhere else decides that they're going to provide sanctuary for those people, what's the recourse on that? I don't know if that's still going to be an issue in January of 2019 or not, but that is an area where I would see no compelling reason for the state of Oklahoma to assist federal authorities in taking action that we might not feel is just. That does not mean that anybody can violate the law and get away with it. You know, if they break the law, that's a whole different deal. The federal government can go get them out of jail and send them wherever they want to send them. Make education safe again. Yeah, if we have a shooter in a school, let's have a crossfire, you know, where bullets are going in both directions. I'm sorry, that was a serious question. I could give a serious answer. The Second Amendment is part of the Constitution. Of course I support that. I have a concealed carry permit myself. I don't think it's a good idea to arm teachers to have additional guns in our schools. I think it's a better idea to make our schools more secure, to make sure that guns don't get in the front door. And that would be my attitude on that. And, you know, arming teachers, in the first place, I think creates more problems than it solves. And in the second place, it does nothing to protect people in shopping centers, in movie theaters, and other places where mass shooters have shown up and taken a good number of lives. So it's, you know, it's an example of the legislature looking for a Band-Aid when they really aren't addressing the real problem. And that's the access to weapons that are highly destructive with clips that no self-respecting hunter would ever take on a hunt with them. Well, you know, my inclination, although I will deeply want to get along with the legislature and develop friendships across party lines, I was thinking about having a trivial bill of the week award or something like that. Seriously, you know, the governor's not going to get very far trying to interfere with the policies of the Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem of the Senate. I would encourage them privately to send those bills off to Rules Committee to die as expeditiously as possible to try to keep those things from hitting the floor of the House and people having to vote on them. Of course, what I consider frivolous may not be considered frivolous by the author or any number of people, but there's some out there that just aren't addressing the needs that we're really facing. You know, with all of the problems facing the state of Oklahoma, we've got a bill to require the statement, "In God We Trust," be on the wall of every classroom in the state. You know, that is not meeting the needs of the state, and I would consider that banning Sharia law from the courts, things like that, should die an early death. Once they get on the floor, some of those things are hard to vote against, because if you vote against that, then you're in favor of Sharia law being used in the courtroom, which is a non sequitur. That's just not true. You just think it's a stupid bill. What would I do? I would talk to the Speaker and the President to try to spare their members from having to vote on that nonsense.
Thank you.
It would take a constitutional amendment, either an initiative petition or a referral by the legislature. It would have to go on the ballot because 640 is in the Constitution, the 75%. It would take a constitutional amendment to fix it. There was a bill working its way through to lower it to either 60 or 65, and I don't know if that's still alive or not. The last I heard, the legislators were backing up on it a little bit, so it may take an initiative petition to get that on the ballot. And I would favor that. My first choice would be to just eliminate it altogether, get that out of the Constitution, and allow us to have a democracy where the majority rules. My second choice would be to lower it to 60%, but have it work both ways. If our revenue code is that important, then let's have 60% to raise revenues or 60% to lower them. to take a supermajority to go in either direction. My last choice, I'd still vote for it, would be just to lower it from 75 to a 60 or 65% figure. Well, I'm going to be aggressive on that. I think part of it's funding, but not all, because our Department of Veterans Affairs gets a large amount of its funding from the federal government. But I have serious concerns about whether they're really caring for our veterans properly, whether they're really paying attention. And, you know, my concern has kind of focused on one facility. I visited the Veterans Center at Tallahena at the request of a friend who was there. He's a resident of that center. And the Department of Veterans Affairs had been working for some time to try to close that center. So I wanted to see whether it was, to me, whether it looked like a good facility or bad facility, and I was very impressed with it. I toured the whole facility. I saw the medical teams that were available. I talked to residents who were adamant about not wanting to move to another facility. This to them was a home. This was their home, and they didn't want it closed, didn't want to move it somewhere else. I found staff that was totally dedicated to the needs of the residents and felt strongly about it. The critique that they get from the Oklahoma Department of Veterans Affairs is they don't have enough staff or they can't keep staff. And the response of the administrators of the facility was, how can we keep people here when the department keeps talking about closing us? You know, how can we attract a doctor or a nurse here as a career move when they keep hearing out of Oklahoma City that the place is about to be closed? So it's a self-fulfilling complaint. And we got to stop that. And I wrote a strongly worded letter to the Department of Veterans Affairs saying they needed to re-examine their position on Tallahena, or at least wait until the next governor takes office before they take an irreversible step in that direction. And I suggested strongly that there would be repercussions if they made that move, and I happened to be the one elected governor. Well, West Virginia sounds like their legislators have the same attitude that the Oklahoma legislators have, that we don't really have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem, and they're just dead wrong. In Oklahoma, to give the teachers the kind of pay raise that they need, we have got to increase the revenues coming into the coffers of the state of Oklahoma. And I've outlined what I think we need to do in order to accomplish that, and it's all doable. It's all things that can be done. The 7% restoration on gross production tax may well be on the ballot this November. There is an initiative petition now that went before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has to rule whether it meets the legal qualifications. That will trigger the 90-day period for collection of signatures. And if there's not a protracted legal challenge after that 90 days, that goes on the ballot this November. So we may get that 7% gross production tax before I ever take office. Things like that need to be done in order to make sure that we can give a raise without robbing the health department or the Department of Mental Health in the process. And that's what I would be about doing. But I want to tell you how serious I am, number one, in gratitude for having an opportunity to come here and visit, but how serious I am about this year being a watershed year. This is a turning point year. I sincerely believe that we can do the kinds of things that I was talking about to reverse the ship of state and get it back on a pathway toward prosperity, economic growth, and economic development. But it's going to take a change in leadership, and not just in the office of governor. Pay attention to who your candidates are for the state house and state senate, and make sure, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, make sure they understand the seriousness of the situation that we're in, and they're dedicated to trying to reach solutions to these problems. We can work across party lines. We may have different ideas about how to do it, but that's why we sit down and talk about these things, to try to figure out, whose solution is the best and how we go forward. If we don't do it, if we don't reverse direction this year and have another 4 or 8 years of the kind of policies that put us in this position, then I'm afraid there are going to be 49 other states saying, thank God we don't live in Oklahoma. And I don't want to see that day. I want to see the day when teachers from Texas come to Oklahoma because the pay is competitive and the quality of life is better. And I think that day is achievable. I think we can do it. All of the things that I've been talking about are not pipe dreams. They are all doable. But it's going to take the will of the people and the election of good candidates to make sure that it happens. I offer you that opportunity. I offer you my candidacy to meet these problems, to reverse direction, and to build a future for the state of Oklahoma that we can all be proud of. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me in this effort. Thank you very much.